News Channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, this is the latest from the GB Newsroom, and GB News understands that Russell Brand has been interviewed by police. A man in his 40s, believed to be the actor and comedian, attended a police station in South London on Thursday. He was interviewed under caution by detectives in relation to 3 non-recent sexual offences. The White House says negotiations to release hostages held by the Hamas terror group in Gaza are at a very sensitive stage. It comes as Israel's ambassador to the US told ABC News he's hopeful a significant number of hostages will be released in the coming days. Qatar, which is home to many Hamas leaders, has played a key role in mediation during the conflict. More than 200 hostages were taken by Hamas on the 7th of October. So far, 4 have been released. People who live near new electricity pylons could stand to benefit by up to £10,000 over a decade. The government is set to announce the move to overcome planning objections and speed up the approval of new energy infrastructure. Homeowners could get £1,000 per year off their household bills, although the Treasury hasn't specified where the money will come from. Minibuses and electric vehicles have been sent to Albania as part of a deal to return foreign prisoners. The arrangement will see 200 Albanian nationals, currently jailed in England and Wales, sent back home for the rest of their sentence. The UK has also agreed to help modernise Albania's prison system. The overall deal is expected to cost around £8 million, which the government says will save money for Britain's prisons. And a ceremony was held at the Cenotaph in London today, commemorating the 102nd anniversary of the first wreath-laying by Jewish veterans. Service people and families of the fallen marched together down Whitehall to honour those who fought and served for freedom since the First World War. The first Star of David wreath was laid in 1921 by a group of Jewish ex-soldiers. This year's parade also marked the 80th anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and 70 years since the end of fighting in the Korean War. And a hat once worn by Napoleon has gone under the hammer in Paris. Its new owner paid £2.1 million for the hat, called a bicorn, which was worn by Napoleon during his rule over the French Empire in the 19th century. Napoleon owned about 120 hats, though the one worn by Joaquin Phoenix in Ridley Scott's epic new film is just a replica. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's time for Camilla.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. We've got an epic show lined up for you today with the government's autumn statement expected on Wednesday, setting out its spending plans for the next 6 months. I'm delighted to bring Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor and MP for South West Surrey, into the conversation now. Lovely to see you this morning, Chancellor. Look, now I know you've done various broadcast rounds where you've refused to say what's happening on Wednesday. There's been talk of you cutting IHT. How about unfreezing these tax bands? You can't be happy about the idea of people on 40,000 or above, some of them might be teachers, some of them might be nurses, actually being fiscally dragged into paying more tax. It's a stealth tax and it needs to stop, doesn't it?
Well, good morning, Camilla. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about the measures that I'm going to be announcing to Parliament on Wednesday, because I have to announce those to Parliament first, and rightly so. But there is a very big dividing line between us and the Labour Party on tax, and I'm really pleased you've mentioned it, because I do believe that if we're going to be a dynamic, thriving, energetic, fizzing economy, we need low tax, and we need taxes to be lower than they are at the moment. And the reason I believe that is if you look around the world, the most dynamic, successful economies at the moment are in North America and Asia, where they tend to have lower taxes. So I know,
but our tax burden is...
I'm only going to do it in a...
Our tax burden is the highest since the Second World War. People watching this, Chancellor, will be staring at the television and listening to the radio in disbelief. Taxes have never been higher than under this Conservative government. You talk about Labour. There was polling in the Mail yesterday to suggest that most people in this country now think that Labour are the party of economic competence.
Well, the truth is, and, you know, there's no getting around this, taxes have gone up in nearly all countries, and our taxes are still lower than places like France, Germany and Italy, because we've had a once-in-a-century pandemic, a 1970s-style oil shock. But the difference is that we do want to bring them down, and Labour put up taxes in every single one of their 13 budgets. Conservatives cut taxes when we responsibly can. So let me tell you, I'm not obviously going to tell you what measures I'm going to do, but let me tell you my approach. First of all, we're not going to do anything irresponsible, particularly by which I mean anything that fuels inflation, because we had a big victory last week when we delivered the Prime Minister's pledge to halve inflation. When he and I came to office, it was over 11%. Now it's 4.6%. People watching at home, their number one concern, they say in poll after poll, is the cost of living crisis. This makes a difference. So we're going to do this responsibly. And then the second thing is my priority on Wednesday is growth, because having made good progress on inflation, we can move to the next part of our plan, which is to unlock much higher levels of growth. And I will say this to you, Camilla, because I know you've written about this before. There is far too much negativity, pessimism and declinism about the British economy. We have got a lot going for us. I'll give you one example. We have got a technology sector that's the third biggest in the world after the United States and China. Technology is going to shape all of our lives. We do it really well. So, you know, if we're going to get taxes down, growing the economy is part of the solution, but it's also part of the way that we can afford to get taxes down as well.
You talk about kind of the talk of declinism. That's not necessarily coming from the general public. It's coming from people like former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney and others, perhaps even ex-Treasury officials that seem to have wanted to keep tax up in the first place. You've talked in general about inflation. I've never been able to understand why the government can claim the rewards of bringing inflation down but not take responsibility for it going up.
Well, we all know why it went up. We had the invasion of Ukraine and a massive spike in energy prices and food prices globally. When you're faced with 11.1% inflation, as Rishi Sunak and I were when we arrived in Downing Street, the government does have to take very difficult decisions alongside the Bank of England to bring it down. Now, what I had to do a year ago in a, frankly, very, very difficult autumn statement for a Conservative Chancellor is I had to put some taxes up, I had to cut spending, because I had to get borrowing under control, because you can't get inflation down if you're pumping money into the economy. That actually fuels higher prices.
Yes.
So we've had to play our part in the government to get to where we've got to. And we don't want to throw that away now we've made such good progress.
Although some people might be scratching their heads wondering how on earth you promote growth by charging businesses 6% more on their corporation tax bills. Why would you set up a business in the UK today when you're tied up in red tape, you're paying more corporation tax and business rates? Why would you?
Well, you were talking about tax thresholds going up in the beginning of this interview, Camilla, and when I took those decisions on tax, I thought it was fair that the pain was evenly balanced amongst businesses and amongst individuals. I wanted to spread those difficult decisions fairly. But I do actually agree with you that one of the most important things for us as a country is to make sure that our taxes are competitive in an area that doesn't, frankly, win you any votes, but is very important, which is business taxes. We need businesses from all over the world to say the UK is a great place to set up a business, a great place to invest. And you'll be hearing lots from me on Wednesday about how we can remove barriers to business investment. One of them we've announced today, actually. We're going to completely overhaul the planning rules, because I meet businesses up and down the country who say it just takes a ridiculous amount of time to get planning approval. We're going to say if local authorities don't meet their statutory timelines, they give businesses the money back. And they process the application free of charge. So we are going to do a lot of things that I hope will make a big difference.
They might want 6% back off their profit margins, Chancellor, but I appreciate the explanation. Good luck on Wednesday. We'll be watching with interest. Thank you for joining me this morning.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order. Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's bring in Darren Jones into the conversation now. He's the Chief Secretary to the Treasury for the Shadow Front Bench. He's Rachel Reeves' deputy, effectively. Mr Jones, lovely to see you this morning. Not sure if you were able to hear what Mr Hunt was saying there. Let's talk about Labour's Better Off plan. I've got this press release in front of me, Mr Jones. You're saying that, first of all, you'd make people better off by £500 a year by insulating homes to make them more energy efficient. I can't quite understand the maths behind that, Mr Jones. Who's paying for the homes to be insulated?
Well, good morning. The £500 a year saving doesn't come actually from the Labour Party. It comes from the energy company E.ON in evidence that they submitted to Parliament. Because obviously, if you are able to insulate your home, the heat that you produce, predominantly via a gas boiler, but maybe by other means, stays in your house for longer and you use less energy, and that goes low.
But you're saying that the taxpayer themselves will have to put the initial outlay for the insulation, that they're paying for the insulation in order to save £500 further down the line?
It will depend on your circumstances. So the government already is doing insulation work in council houses, for example, and housing association houses. We think they should be doing more of that more quickly, but that's already existing.
You're also saying that people can save £900 a year by building cheaper, cleaner power across the country through the creation of Great British Energy. Again, how much is the creation of Great British Energy going to cost, Mr Jones?
Well, again, it depends on the type of technology. But what we do know from the past year is that if you're relying on importing gas, fossil fuels from countries overseas where there could be war or other things that happen, the price can go through the roof. That's why people's energy bills have been so expensive in the past year. Whereas if you have energy based here in the United Kingdom that's renewable, that maybe is nuclear, the price is more stable, it's lower.
I get all that. No, I understand. But how are you going to pay for the cost of building cheaper, cleaner power across the country, and how much will it cost?
Well, let me give you some illustrative examples. Nuclear, for example, is an important part of the energy mix. Hinkley Point C has been paid for under the existing government. They've put some investment into Sizewell C. The rest of that money will have to be private sector investment. That's an example of where in the Labour
But have you got a price tag on how much this costs, though? If Labour are in power, how much are they going to set aside for the Great British Energy project?
Oh, I see. But Camilla, what I can't do is give you a per project price for per technology across the country.
But has it been costed?
All of our policies are costed, but what GB Energy is a publicly owned company that will do deals with the private sector under a Labour government to ensure that we're building as much homegrown energy as possible.
OK, you've also promised in this press release a crackdown on unfair car insurance practices like subscription traps and unfair postcode pricing. You're saying that motorists will save £400 a year, but surely motorists are being charged more for their insurance because of the rising cost of claims, the rising cost of repairs and indeed labour shortages. So what difference will it make if you do something about auto-renewal?
Well, the subscription trap that many of your viewers will be familiar with is when you sign up to a product and it automatically renews probably normally a year after you signed up to it. And people have got busy lives and they might miss an email or a message, or they might not even be told that it's renewing at a new price. And we say that action should be taken to prevent that from happening. People should be given proper advance notice and the ability to be able to find better priced products in other parts of the market.
No, I get that too. I understand the problem with auto-renewal. We've all fallen victim to it. But what I'm saying is it's not going to touch the sides, is it? If insurance prices keep on going up because of the rising cost of repairs and labour shortages. So it's just a sort of, you're making a statement about auto-renewal. What difference is that going to make? That's not why insurance bills are going up.
Well, Camilla, let me give you some advice. If your insurance product comes to an end and you ring up your insurance provider...
Yeah, no, I know.
And you say,
but I'm...
No, I've not... Well, Camilla, I've not told you the point you're telling me you know. Let me just finish the sentence. When you call up the insurance provider and say, hi, I can get this at a cheaper price with another insurance provider, can you do me a deal? Every single time they say yes and they lower the price. So clearly they can afford that.
I get the point about auto-renewal, but what I'm saying is, and I've had anecdotal evidence of this only really in the last couple of weeks, across the board, insurance prices are going up because the rising cost of repairs and indeed labour shortages mean that insurance companies are having to put up premiums. So yeah, auto-renewal might help a little bit, but £400 a year is probably being ambitious if exponentially insurance costs keep on rising. Let's move on to the next point. $1,200 a year could come off mortgage bills by building 1.5 million homes over Parliament. This one has just confused me because Keir Starmer's stance on building has confused me. Back in 2021, he talked about the Tories' proposed planning reforms as being a, quote, developer's charter. Then, at conference, he effectively suggested bulldozing through planning laws and local planning laws to build these 1.5 million homes. So is he NIMBY or YIMBY?
I don't think I can remember what NIMBY or YIMBY stands for. YIMBY is yes, isn't it?
Yeah, yes in my backyard versus no in my backyard.
Got it. Forgive me not knowing the slang. But look, yes, we are for house building because we know there are not enough houses. There are not enough affordable houses across the country. That has an impact not just on people who are in a position to buy their first home, but for people who are in the rental market where the price of rent has been going up and up year after year. One of the best ways you can tackle increasing costs of living is to be able to build more affordable homes in our country. And we make no apologies for saying that we will do that.
OK, can I just have a general overview of Labour's approach to the economy if the time comes that you're actually in power? I appreciate you don't want to give specifics and you haven't come up with your manifesto and all the rest of it. But in principle, do you envisage Labour cutting taxes and cutting spending?
Well, to answer your three questions in that question, firstly, our approach to the economy is anchored on getting the economy growing because we've not had economic growth for many, many years now. And that means that you don't have businesses making profits, your workers' pay isn't going up, and the amount of revenue coming into the Treasury is not keeping up with costs. So you have to be anchored in trying to grow the economy. We can talk about that more if you'd like to. The second point that you mentioned there is around taxes. We've said in the Labour Party that we want the tax burden to come down on working people. It's the highest it has been since the Second World War. We've had 25 Conservative tax rises in this Parliament alone. But we can only announce those tax cuts when they can be fully funded. And if the Chancellor is going to announce a tax cut on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at how he's been able to get the money to pay for that to happen. And the third part of your question, which was around public sector spending, one of the key things there is that even though the Chancellor has been taking more money from us than ever before, all of our public services are on their knees. So there's a huge question about how we reform and modernise our public services so that they are better for people that rely on them, but that they're also more cost effective to run in the long run. And on all three of those issues, public sector reform, tax and growing the economy, these are difficult, complicated issues. The Tories have clearly run out of energy and run out of steam. And that's why we're confident that an incoming Labour government with new ideas and new energy will be able to turn that around.
Because, of course, Rachel Reeves has had to slightly water down your green prosperity pledge. That's $28 billion for 5 years for this new green prosperity plan. She said she had to water that down because of the current economic climate, or the climate you might inherit next year. But at the same time, of course, $28 billion over the course of 5 years is adding a lot of money to the national debt, isn't it? How is that affordable if you're worried about how you're going to balance up the idea of tax cuts and indeed spending cuts with a pledge of that magnitude?
Sure. So all of our plans are subject to our fiscal rules. That's why Rachel has said that after Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng crashed the economy and the cost of borrowing went through the roof, we would have to be more constrained in what we would be able to do in government. That's as a consequence of the Conservatives' failure on the economy. The second thing to say is there is a difference between what the Conservatives have done in government, which is to take on debt to cover up their failure because they can't get the economy growing and they can't fix our public services. That is different to our Green Prosperity Plan, which is where we are investing alongside business. And we think that for every £1 of taxpayers' money, we can get £3 out of the private sector to build the infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, the jobs of tomorrow, because that will help get the economy growing. And in the long run, that investment will then be paid off by the private sector through the taxes that they contribute to the Treasury as a consequence of having a profitable business in our country in an economy that is growing.
But you're not going to be worried about that level of borrowing when it doesn't look like interest rates are going to come down anytime soon. I appreciate who you're attributing blame to for them going up in the first place. But at the moment, we've got the Bank of England and other experts talking about that 5% rate flatlining for some time to come. Therefore, it's not going to be cheap to borrow this $28 billion a year.
Yeah, as I said, they're all subject to our fiscal rules, and we don't know what the economic environment will be at the point that the election is called next year, and we'll need to see what it looks like then. But all of our policies, I should say, are fully costed and subject to our fiscal rules. Everything we do will be done responsibly.
OK, Darren Jones, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you 3.
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order. Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Now, Kwasi Kwarteng, the former Chancellor and Business Secretary, Tory MP for Spelthorne, joins me now in the studio. Kwasi, lovely to see you this morning.
Good to see you.
Is it a bit triggering to watch another Chancellor prepare an autumn statement?
Not at all. I think that it's something which is a custom in the House, and I'm looking forward to hear what he says.
If you were him, what would you do on Wednesday? Because we've had him on this morning, and as is ever the custom, we've said, what's in the autumn statement, only to be told, I can't tell you what's in the autumn statement till Wednesday, which rather makes a mockery of these chancellors doing the broadcast round. But anyway, what would you do? Because he's coming under heavy pressure from backbenchers and indeed the country and business owners to bring taxes down.
So look, having been in that position, and we've had this debate a lot, I think the one thing he's got to realise is that a year is quite a long time. So all I would say about this is that I don't see how he can go into the budget next year and not give some sort of tax cuts. We can't go into an election saying we're going to just increase your taxes indefinitely.
Do you mean on Wednesday or next year?
So I mean before the election next year. There'll be a year before the general election.
Yes.
So whether he does the tax cut this year in the autumn statement or in the budget next year, I think it has to come. I think he has to give some indication that he's actually going to do what he says he is, which is, he says, he and the Prime Minister say they're low-tax conservatives.
Yes.
But at some point before the election, they have to show that...
Are they low-tax conservatives?
Well, they've got to show,
I mean,
in
people
reality...
find that statement astonishing.
Well, the taxes haven't come down yet, and they've given the...
But do you appreciate the incredulity of our audience listening to Jeremy Hunt going, we're low-tax conservatives? Well, you've got a funny way of showing it.
Yeah, I think if you say, you know, you're doing your one thing, you've got to show that you mean business in that regard. I understand the caution. I totally understand that. I experienced what I did last year, and there was arguably a lack of forward planning. But at the same time, I do think that he has to cut taxes.
But doesn't he need to? I know what you're saying about there needs to be tax cuts before the next general election. He needs to show a bit of leg on Wednesday, doesn't he? There's reports of him now having £26 billion more fiscal headroom. And
but the headroom can change. I mean, that was one of the issues that we had last year, was that they said it was a £72 billion black hole, and it was obvious to me, given the fact that we had a bit of fiscal drag, inflation was high, that figure would have changed in the new year, and it did.
Yes.
This year, the 72 billion hole changed into a surplus. Now they're saying it's a surplus. Who knows what will happen next year? The headroom could just as easily vanish next year.
Okay.
As appear this year.
So what's the most politically expedient thing for him to do in your mind? There's obviously reports of him maybe cutting IHT.
Sure.
The left and indeed the Observer have said it's a tax cut for the rich. It doesn't affect that many people anyway.
Yeah.
What's your theory on that, first of all?
I think you've got to do what you think is right. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think we wanted to reduce business taxes. Business taxes, you never really win votes, but you do actually improve economic conditions. You do actually generate investment. And I think that's very important. And that's why, you know, a country like Ireland, I remember the President of Ireland telling me that that was the most successful policy they'd had in 30 years.
Exactly. So why isn't the current government aping it? I mean, we talked about all of this post-Brexit opportunity. Corporation tax now up there with France and Germany. He's saying we've got lower taxes than these European nations, but that's hardly a sort of marker to live by, is it?
That's right. And he himself said that actually the countries or the areas that were impressive were North America and Asia.
Yeah.
And that was what Jeremy
where
said.
Taxes are lower.
Where taxes are lower. And I think that's where we've got to go.
What do you think about this idea that businesses are saddled with too much red tape, with too much tax, this refusal to reform or bring back the IR35 situation? The VAT on luxury goods seems like a spectacular old goal.
That's right.
Are these some of the things that should be unravelled?
Well, we tried to get rid of them and sort that out in the mini budget. And then, of course, Jeremy was brought in essentially to reverse everything we did. And my view at the time was that we were throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, there were some things that you could modify, but to throw out everything, I think, was a wrong signal.
Take us inside the Treasury, OK? He turns around to Treasury officials, the so-called blob that has been spoken about for decades, and says, I'd like to cut this, I'd like to cut that, I'd like to alter this. What then happens? You've been there. Does the Treasury just push back on all this stuff?
No, they don't. What they'll do is they'll look at a model and they'll say, Chancellor, if you cut this tax, this means that you've got to fund, you know, it's a black hole of 8 billion. So that was the thing that the OBR looked at, and they kind of mark your homework. And the way their models work mean that every bit of tax you reduce means that you have to spend more money.
Yes.
They don't believe in any sense of incentivizing the economy.
Yeah.
So if you were to argue, look, we're going to reduce corporation tax to attract investment, that's not an argument that they they find particularly
So
persuasive.
you tried to circumvent the OBR precisely because
Well,
of this.
that was the rationale.
But then we're back to square one, because it strikes me, and this was Liz Truss's argument, OK, that actually you try and pull on levers, and then you've got the civil service pulling on the lever in the opposite direction.
So my view actually is a bit more nuanced than that. I think there is a way in which you can square the OBR and reduce taxes. And with that, you've got to have an honest conversation about spending cuts.
Yes.
You've got to present the two together. That's why I've always said I'm not a Reaganite. I don't believe, actually, ultimately, that you just can reduce taxes without showing what your spending
I know, but then you
situation is
didn't
like.
take OBR advice.
No, we didn't.
And that was a mistake?
I think looking back, that was a mistake. But you've got to do
Even
what,
though the OBR doesn't seem to have predicted anything correctly in years.
that was the thing. So look, the issue
So is it a mistake or not? Should we be listening to the OBR or not?
So what I think was wrong about last year was we were incredibly bold and then we capitulated. That was.
So what are you saying? Your regret is that you didn't just steamroller through, even though the markets were going mad.
I didn't have a say. I mean, I was sacked. So
yeah, okay.
So I didn't have a say.
What, you think that Truss should have held her nerve?
I think it was interesting how, if you look at last year, 2 prime ministers fell. Boris left after half his government had resigned, and Liz left after 7 weeks because markets were very jittery. I totally understand that. And it was just interesting the way in which I think Boris clung on, perhaps a little too long, people might say, and Liz capitulated after 7 weeks. Interesting contrast.
You talk about Boris Johnson clinging on for too long.
People say that he did.
I mean, will people say that Rishi Sunak's done the same?
No, look, I think Rishi Sunak is in a very difficult situation. And you've got to remember that Jeremy Hunt wasn't appointed by him. Jeremy Hunt was appointed by Liz Truss.
And apparently, according to Lord Ashcroft's book, we mentioned this earlier with Anna, Rishi Sunak turned around and said, oh, do I have to keep Hunt as Chancellor? And they were like, yeah, because you're going to spook the markets if you don't. So do you think that Jeremy Hunt is Rishi Sunak's ideal Chancellor?
Look, I think they've got a good working relationship.
But he's not ideal.
But let's state a fact. Most prime ministers choose their own Chancellor.
And he didn't.
And he didn't. So that's enough said.
I mean, is Jeremy Hunt's position safe? What if it goes wrong on Wednesday?
I think it is. I mean, look, having lived that experience myself, and I even said that to Liz Truss last year, I think once, for whatever reason, the Prime Minister gets rid of his or her Chancellor, I think it becomes... their position becomes under more pressure.
Let's talk about the return of Lord Cameron. Your reaction to him turning up in Downing
He's a
Street?
very capable... I was surprised. I was very surprised.
A bit regressive, isn't it?
Well, it was odd that someone who says that he's a change candidate brought someone back...
Continuity Cameron.
Who hadn't been in office for 7 years. But that aside, David is a very capable politician. He's a skillful, serious international figure. And I think he'll do a good job.
Although, do you agree with George Osborne's analysis of the situation that Lord Cameron is now the second most senior person in government?
I think George is being mischievous because, I mean, how can someone in the House of Lords who doesn't answer to ministers in the House of Commons, MPs in the House of Commons, how could they be the second most important person?
Well, that's you raise an interesting point. Is lack of accountability a problem here with this appointment? He's not going to be answerable in the Commons. There's talk about making him have more political scrutiny because he'll have to speak to the select committees. But it's all a bit opaque, this, isn't it?
Look, I think it was an unusual step. I understand why Rishi and the team around him thought it was a good idea. I'm sure you'll get Richard Tice and he will have views on the return of David Cameron. But I understand why Rishi's done the job.
But is he going to start lobbying Jeremy Hunt for more foreign aid? We know he had an absolute obsession with this 0.7% of GDP target, and it's gone down to 0.5%. If he starts lobbying Hunt for more foreign aid money, which isn't particularly popular with our audience, not least in a cost of living crisis, Jeremy Hunt should resist him, shouldn't he?
I think he will. I think they're going to stick to the 0.5. I don't see how we're going to increase it to 0.7 when we've got the deficits that we're...
Should we talk about Suella Braverman?
Yeah, sure.
What did you think of the letter?
I'm afraid I thought the letter damaged her. It was too long.
Yeah.
And it was too emotional.
Did you agree with any of it, though?
I think that she
thinking.
Well, that magical thinking, that was a kind of a loaded phrase. I think she has a lot of integrity. And I think she was trying... Yeah, I do. I think
Why
she was
do you
trying
say that?
Because I think she was trying to solve a problem that is, dogged, governments for the government for years.
Yes.
And I think she is a very honest person. I know her. I regard her as a friend.
Have you spoken to her since the letter?
I haven't, but I actually fought Brent East after her mother did.
Yes.
So I know the family.
Yes.
And I have a lot of respect for her. But I think the letter was almost too much. You know, the best letters are the shorter ones, not 3 pages.
It's better for the media for it to be longer, isn't it?
Well, you've got more to
But is this just naked kind of electioneering
No,
on
I
her
don't-
personal
no.
behalf? Does she want to be the next leader of the Tories?
I think both Rishi and Suella had a bit of right. I can see why Rishi had to get rid of her, because she was openly challenging. Well, she was doing her own thing essentially.
Yeah.
But I can see why she was as resentful
The public
as she is.
agrees with her. You know, a lot of the polling, particularly the GB audience, agrees with her on immigration and the crackdown. Also agrees with her, by the way, on this idea of police bias. I mean, we see the situation with more marches taking place. We saw the heavy-handed nature of how protesters at lockdown events were treated, and indeed even people at a vigil for Sarah Everard, compared to now people scrambling all over War Memorial. I'm sorry, if that isn't a breach of the peace, what is?
So
Do
look,
you think the police are playing favourites?
No. So
really?
Whether you think, I'm going to say something, you know, slightly, well, not controversial, but whether you think the police are biased or not, I don't think it's the place of the Home Secretary to voice that openly. That was the issue. I mean, having been a Secretary of State, you're dealing with stakeholders. You know, the Education Secretary deals with teachers. As a business secretary, I dealt with, you know, the energy sector or business sector. And I think generally, any kind of criticism to a body like that would be behind closed doors.
Isn't she just standing up for her constituents and indeed the people that elected her to office?
Absolutely.
She has to be, somebody has to turn around to the Met and question whether they are biased.
That may be true, but I don't think, and it's a matter of interpretation. I don't think it was her job as Home Secretary, frankly, to voice that openly.
As a backbencher who doesn't have a relationship with the Met Police in that close proximity, do you think that they've been playing favourites?
I think when people look at some of the decisions they make, I think people say, well, you know, why is it that, you know, a EDL march has been banned and then a pro Hamas, which is a terrorist group?
I mean, are you saying the marches are pro-Hamas? Not all of the marches are pro-Hamas, right?
No, but some of the placards you see are openly pro.
But you're equating the pro-Palestinian marches
No, I'm not.
with the EDL ones, or not?
No, all I'm saying...
You're saying they were more heavy-handed with the EDL than they should have been with anti-Semites.
Okay, let me put it very broadly. Some marches are banned outright, and others are allowed to proceed. And all I'm saying is that people look at that and say, well, what's going on? And that's a legitimate question in a democracy. All I'm also saying is I don't think the Home Secretary, who ultimately is responsible for the Met, should necessarily be criticising them in newspapers.
It's interesting to see some opinion polling, let's see, Opinium, which is usually carried by the left-wing media, so it usually tends to favour left-wing parties. However, says that Labour's lead has dropped to 13 points. I mean, that's good news for the Tories, but you've been around the block a bit, if you don't mind me saying, Kwasi. What do you think is going to happen next year?
Look,
Tory wipeout?
So there are probably about 10 polling companies.
Yeah.
Okay, and they all have slightly different methods, and they all report different numbers. Opinion over time tends to show a slightly smaller gap between Labour and the Conservatives, and other polls show slightly wider gaps. But all I can say is that the Tory party faces a real challenge next year.
Do you think MPs are aware of that? Because there's lots of people who walked into their seats in 2019 on the back of anyone but Corbyn and Boris, and they didn't have to campaign that vociferously to win. And they're facing extraordinarily adverse circumstances now, aren't they? I mean, we just had Jeremy Hunt on. He might lose his seat.
Yeah,
I mean,
look,
do you
I don't
think
know.
it's going to be some kind of bloodbath?
No.
Be honest.
I think potentially, if things don't change, we're in very deep trouble.
How many seats do you think you might lose?
I don't.
But are you talking about a stonking Labour majority?
No.
Are you talking about hung party? What's your prediction? I know it's hard to make them, but let's have a go.
Look, I think it's not over. And as I always say, and I kept saying this, a year is a very long time.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
so, just to re-emphasise that point, Theresa May was 20 points ahead of Labour 8 weeks before the election. That was 8 weeks.
Yeah.
By the day of the election, she was only 2 points ahead.
Yeah.
So things could change very quickly. But you've asked me to say what I think now. I think, as it is now, looking at the numbers, I think the Tories are going to have a real job in their hands to try and get back into government.
Drubbing?
I think anything could happen, but I think if we don't get our act together, I think we're going to have a very difficult election.
Quick word on Darren Jones. I think you caught some of the interview. I mean, he handled the questions quite well. Is it any surprise that the punters, the voters, are now describing the Labour Party as the party of economic competence?
No,
Should the Tories be doing more to attack Labour on some? I mean,
I think we will.
The media attack. Where are the figures? Where are the figures? Have you caught this? But you're not really taking the gloves off.
Look, all I would say is, and there's always a rush to do things and be bold and be active. We've got a year before the election. As I said, only 6 years ago.
I know, but then you were in a rush with the mini-budget last week.
I agree. I speak, I put my hand up and say it was a real rush.
Yes.
That was one of the issues. And I think we could have staged things more carefully. And I've said that repeatedly over the last year.
But you're saying both that you're in last chance saloon and they've got to act quickly, but then also that it's a marathon, not a sprint?
So what I've said is consistent, OK? What I've said is that we've got to do something before the election.
Yeah.
But the election's a year away and they'll have another chance at the budget.
All right. Thank you very much. No, it's very insightful and it's always great to have you in the studio. Thank you very much indeed, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. I've got disgruntled Conservative catnip in the studio. Richard Tice, leader of the Reform Party, and my GB News colleague joins me now.
I've been described as all sorts of things, but never catnip before.
Catnip for disgruntled Tories. Well, you are kind of, aren't you? I mean, I wrote an article about Keir Starmer.
I'm the solution, I'm the saviour, not the catnip.
Well, let's see if you are the saviour. Indeed, I wrote an article about Keir Starmer and lots of people were saying, don't vote Tory, vote Reform. So just run us through, where are you at? What are your numbers like? both kind of in polling terms but also membership?
So this was a significant week, and I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, for everything he's doing for reform. We should put him on a commission deal. Our members have soared again to record numbers this week.
Record numbers is what, Richard?
We don't give the exact number.
Come on now.
No, but I can tell you it's record number. I know we are.
Just whisper it, don't worry.
No, I know, but no, I'm not going to give a running commentary.
Well, just generally.
But generally...
hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands?
This is the first week where we've had double digits in the polls.
I thought you were going to say double digits in the membership. No.
4 separate polls have had us at 10 or 11%, only 8 points
10
behind...
10 or 11%?
That's the
good,
first time.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Only 8 points behind the Conservative Party. And I think we are seeing, essentially, the dying days, potentially the last ever majority Conservative government in my lifetime. They are toxic. People have had enough.
OK, having said that, if people vote for you, they're just going to split the vote on the right and you're going to just let Labour walk straight into number 10.
It's completely the opposite. Only reform now, Camilla, can stop Labour. The Tories have had their chance. We did the right thing back in 19. We stood aside. We let them get a big seat majority. They've blown it. They've messed up. They should do the right thing. They should stand aside.
That's Richard, don't be ridiculous. That's not going to happen.
Those who say we're going to split the vote on the right, if you're worried about it, you can't vote for failure. You can't reward failure.
Are you seriously suggesting that Tory MPs should stand aside for reform?
Well, they're all terrified that they're going to lose their seats. Right.
But they're not going to do
that. They all know they're going to lose.
OK.
The brand is toxic. If they want to stop Labour, they should do the right thing as we did back in 19. I can beat Keir Starmer. They can't.
Can you beat Keir Starmer? You've got
head-to-head without
10 or 11 in the polls, and the latest opinion puts, I think, the Tories on about 26. So at the moment, you can't beat Keir Starmer. The Conservatives, if they improve things, if they become more low tax and a bit more Tory...
They're going the opposite direction. They're going down. The brand is going down. It's toxic. We're the only party that has a serious plan to stop the boats, right? The whole Rwanda plan has completely failed.
Would you scrap Rwanda?
It was never going to work. So scrap Rwanda, stop wasting time, money and effort. The only thing you can do is what Australia did. You pick up, you safely take back. We're entitled to do that under international treaties. That's the only thing that will stop the boats. Labour won't stop the boats, only reform you can.
OK, but then I suppose if you're going to use the Australia example, you do need to have an overseas processing area like Nauru or somewhere like that.
And we've got plenty of British overseas territories.
So we shouldn't have chosen Rwanda, we should have chosen... Where would you have chosen?
Well, I'm not going to say where I'd chosen.
Oh, go on.
No, but we've got overseas territories, and that's what we should do.
Hang on, you need to put a bit of meat on the bones here, because you're saying you can solve immigration. So tell us, where would you process people, if not Rwanda?
I would put them in a British overseas territory.
Which one?
I will come back to that.
Ascension Island?
There's a variety of places we could put them that are in our control.
You must tell us, because immigration is a key plank of what reform...
We're the only people with a critical plan. You've got to leave the ECHR.
So where would you process people, if not
and
Rwanda?
Take back. Well, do you know, the best thing to do is process them very quickly here. Actually, 20 years ago, they would be processed in 2 weeks. The appeal took a third week, and they were deported.
Ascension
That's the smart
Island,
things.
St Helena.
There's a variety of places.
Associated with Napoleon, there's a film out.
Let's not go into that detail.
Why can't we go into the detail?
Because the real thing is process them promptly, rapidly, in weeks, not years, here in the UK, and then deport them. That's what's the existing law. That's what we should do. And you've got to stop the pull factor, the magnet factor, by picking up and taking back, using existing international treaties. The other point about immigration is that the Tories have basically opened the borders. The Labour Party want even more open border mass immigration. We believe the only net zero we want is net zero lawful immigration. One in, one out.
I get that.
About 400,000 people leave the country every year. We could welcome high-qualified, high-skilled immigrants to that sort of number who will add value to the economy.
Would you put a cap on legal migration, and what would it be?
It would be 1 in, 1 out. Over a 3 to 5 year period, it would be about...
What if people say that's going to cause enormous labour shortages?
It won't. What it will do is it will increase the wages of British workers and it'll get people back to work. It'll make work pay.
If businesses can afford to pay them more, because at the moment they're having to pay 6% more in corporation tax.
Yes,
what would you do with corporation tax?
Well, we've always said you should cut corporation tax, take it straight back to 19. The one good thing George Osborne did, bless him, was actually have a direction of travel to 17. We should have been heading towards 15. This Prime Minister, under his watch, he sent it back to 25%. It's a disaster. You've got to cut the vast amount of wasteful government spending across all departments, across local authorities.
How would you do that in practice, though?
In practice, it's very simple. You say to everybody, in the same way that you do in business, and indeed we're doing with our household budgets. Right, I need to save £5 in 100, right, but not touch frontline services. And in business, what you say, do that or you're fired.
I know, but who would you bring in to do it? Are you talking about bringing the private sector in?
You've actually got to bring
and...
in successful people from the private sector to force this through.
Do they want to work in politics, though, these successful people?
If they were working with successful people with a track record, with a clear vision, clear conviction, I think absolutely, like you have in America. It's part of your civic duty to come and help the country. The country's broken under the Tories. Labour were bankrupt. Britain, only the Reform UK policies will save Britain.
I just want to return to this issue of British overseas territories. Why are you reluctant to name any? I don't quite understand it.
Because that's not... The key thing is, people want to know, is that you'll process them quickly, wherever it is.
I know, but you haven't decided on where they could do it.
The best place is in Britain. Do it in 2 weeks in Britain.
OK. Can I say something which you might not like, but I'm going to say it anyway?
It's not the first time.
But reform isn't going to make the headway it needs without Nigel Farage at the helm, is it?
Look, the more help, the better. He's temporarily engaged elsewhere, as we know.
I know, he could be eating kangaroo testicles as we speak.
I've always said, you know, Nigel's a huge figure and can help a lot.
So is he going to come back and help?
Well,
why is he in the jungle? Is he doing it for electoral success come 2024, do you think?
He's very clear. He's doing it so that more young people can actually see and understand Nigel, the personality, as opposed to what they've been sort of misinformed in the press that doesn't like him.
I mean, I don't want to besmirch your very strong leadership of this party, but you need him to be leading it, don't you?
No, what I say is the more help, the better. I've always said, if Nigel wants to come back into UK politics...
As leader?
Well, look, let's not focus on titles, let's focus on action.
Well, it's important, isn't it? Because he was so successful with the Brexit Party.
And the real key thing is that the more people who help, the more people who hear about us, the better. But Nigel's concern is first past the post. And he and I are completely committed to getting proportional representation.
I know, trouble is, though, it's not as sexy to campaign on first past the post as it is Brexit. People don't understand it.
And the thing about Brexit is that, yes, we've technically left, but we haven't got Brexit done properly, pragmatically. They haven't taken advantage of the opportunity. If you're going to do a job, do it properly. All the things we stand for, cutting taxes, cutting data eggs, cutting immigration, these are the things that people who voted Brexit, they want, and they know that only reform will do.
Do you think it was a mistake to call the party Reform, you know, Reclaim, Respect? There's loads of parties beginning with R. Why don't you just stick to the Brexit Party? Because everyone knew it.
It does what it says on the tin. The country needs reforming in so many ways.
Right. Well, that's all from me today. I'll be back next week at 9:30.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast. We're looking ahead to the new working week. It's going to be a bit of a grey and damp start out there. For some of us, it will turn dry during the middle part of the week, but then a good deal colder as we head towards next weekend. Back to the here and now, we've still got this area of low pressure close by. Still got some tightly packed ice bars down towards the south, so indicating another blustery night. Also keep an eye on this area of rain as it moves across parts of South Wales and South West England. Could turn quite squally for a time as that moves through. Elsewhere, a good deal of cloud around, clearest of the skies over towards the east, but for most, as we start Monday morning, we start off on a fairly mild note. So that band of rain will continue to clear towards France